We have already learned about pull requests, and to show you a little bit more about the power of pull requests and how eventually everything is going to be integrated through CI and CD, I want to give you a quick rundown, as the project is right now, of what you may expect eventually having CI and CD completely integrated. For this, of course, I am going to be using the most simple version of continuous integration and continuous delivery that we can have directly on this GitHub repository that we have just created. And for that, I am going to need two things. The first one is to create a README file that you will be able to create directly from this button right here that appears if you do not have a README file. And this README file is simply going to be a markdown file where you can add some text, some images, links, and so on. Do not worry if you're not familiar with Markdown. Essentially what we're going to be doing is adding a few titles and subtitles in here. So for example, if I have this SAM example, I may add a subtitle that reads something like this and change the small paragraph at the bottom. I can even hit on the preview button to see how this is going to look eventually. I am going to commit these changes, quick changes, to the README file. I am going to do everything directly in the dev branch, no need to do anything else. And now that the README file is ready, GitHub is going to be using it to display more information about this repository. So if you have ever navigated over to some GitHub repository that has a bunch of information down below, that is all coming from the README file. Now, the reason why I wanted this README file is because the README file and some other options, of course, are available, but mainly the README file is used by GitHub Pages. And we are not here to talk about GitHub Pages a lot. I just want you to navigate over to settings from, by the way, the original GitHub account in here, the one that created this repository. And here in options, I will be able to navigate almost all the way to the bottom to the GitHub Pages section. GitHub Pages essentially is going to create a public page, a public URL, where people can navigate and take a look at this repository's README file. It's a bit more complicated than that, but for now, let's just say that this GitHub page is going to display my README file. And all I have to do for that page to be enabled is to select one option from this list. And what we want to do is use the master branch to create that GitHub page. Now, if I navigate back to that GitHub Pages section, I can see that URL. And if I open it, I can see that there is nothing in here because my README file is not yet on the master branch. But actually, let me leave that URL open in a new tab, and eventually I should see some text in here. But for us to be able to see the README file in here, I am going to guide you through the entire simulated CI/CD process right here on GitHub. The simplest version of a continuous integration, continuous delivery process. So let's start with continuous integration. And we can think of continuous integration, at least in the scenario that we have right now, as a fact that merging into the master branch is going to require one approving review. So let's simulate that process by navigating over to my other GitHub account, which of course will now have access to that README file, and editing that README file and creating a pull request to the master branch. So I'm going to open the README file, I am going to edit it, and I am going to add maybe a second subtitle in here. Once I have these changes, I am going to commit them. I am going to do that directly to the dev branch, but once these changes are committed, I am going to create a new pull request. Just to follow the flow that we have been using, I am going to first commit to test, which is not protected, so this is not really CI yet, or the simulated CI that we're going to have here. So I can just create a pull request and immediately merge everything into the test branch. There's nothing protecting the test branch from making pull requests. So once everything is in the test branch, I can now create the actual pull request that we are going to be using to simulate the CI/CD process. So I am going to set the base to be master and the compare to be test. I am going to create a pull request and I am going to create it. Of course, because I know that master is protected, that review is required. Here is where we are going to be simulating continuous integration in the scenario that we have right now with no App Center yet. So what is required in here is that approval, that approving review that I'm going to add from the original GitHub account. Navigate to the pull request, open the pull request, and I'm just quickly going to be adding a review. I can also add it from here, add an approving review, and submit the review, with no comments in this case. As soon as that is approved, and this eventually is going to be a little bit different and automated, but once this is approved, we can say that the continuous integration process has been completed. Now, we can navigate over to the other GitHub account and see that indeed it has been approved. Now, the most important thing in here with this pull request is the next step, the simulation of the continuous delivery process. Because as soon as the continuous integration and continuous quality processes have been completed, meaning that all of the tests have passed and we are ready to merge into the master branch, now comes the continuous delivery process. And it all starts by merging and confirming the merge into the master branch. As soon as the master branch receives all of this code, the continuous delivery process is triggered. And in our scenario, it is as simple as navigating over to the GitHub page and reloading the page and seeing that everything is right there. Because in our case, GitHub Pages is pulling everything from the README file, which is made available from the README file in the master branch, which is of course made available as soon as the pull request is sent over to master, as soon as the merging, in our case from test, is made available to master. And we can double check that by navigating over to the code, to the master branch, and noticing that indeed there is the README file, which is being used by the GitHub page. Of course, this continuous delivery is oversimplified because we're simply using a file from here. What we're going to do with App Center, both when it comes to continuous integration and continuous delivery, is going to be a bit more complicated than this, but essentially this is what happens. A pull request triggers these processes, triggers the continuous integration, triggers continuous quality, so tests are performed, and triggers continuous delivery, so eventually our users can access this new version of our code. Hopefully with this quick simulation, with this quick rundown, you get a better idea of how important pull requests are going to be. How really pull requests are going to be the foundation of the entire continuous integration and continuous delivery process. And how then GitHub has a very important role in these curves and in any DevOps scenario. Now that you are starting to use a little bit more here on GitHub and that you have created a few pull requests, in the next section, we're finally going to start using App Center. We're going to be creating the actual application that we're going to be using throughout the rest of the course, creating our account on App Center and making use of some of App Center's features that I've already mentioned in the previous section. So without further ado, let's jump over to the Intro to App Center section.